The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
If you hope to fix a fence or build a deck or just do some repairs around your home this spring, brace yourself. The price of lumber has shot up nearly 500% since the beginning of this pandemic, and tonight we're going to find out why. Then, Cineplex CEO Ellis Jacob explains the costs of being closed during much of this pandemic and offers his take on when we might be able to go back to watching movies on the big and silver screen. It's Monday, May 10th, and that's all next on the agenda. Adapting to lockdowns and stay-at-home orders has had unexpected ripple effects. One of them, lumber, has become a hot and pricey commodity in this pandemic era. With us to explain why, in Boston, Massachusetts, Paul Yankee. He is principal of Lumber Forest Economic Advisors. In London, Ontario, Sue Wastel, president, Wastel Homes. She's also a second vice president at the Canadian Home Builders Association. And in Stouffville, Ontario, in York Region, Chris Black, general manager and partner at Century Mill Lumber. I want to thank all three of you for joining us on TVO tonight. And just to get our conversation started, I'm going to ask my friend Tony Burke to bring up this first graphic here because it really does show, and I'll describe it for those listening on podcast in some detail. Here's the price change in softwood lumber sold by manufacturers in Canada. That red line starts off in what looks like a fairly reasonable place and goes, fairly straight across. But holy cow, does it ever go up to the heavens by the end. In April 2019, as the pandemic began, the price of a standard 8-foot Western spruce and fir 2x4 was $2.86. And today that price is $10. The rising price of lumber can now add more than $30,000 in additional costs to build a 2,500 square foot home. And yet, 44% of Canadians, we're told, have completed or are planning to do some home renovations during the course of this pandemic. Well, we have talked a lot about flattening the coronavirus pandemic curve. Let's see if we can do the same for wood prices, because we're not flattening any curves there. Paul, to you first. You've been in this industry for more than 25 years. Give us a better sense of just what that looks like on the ground for the price rises we've seen in the past year or so.
Yeah, well, unfortunately for your viewers, your graph is out of date by a month. And crazy as this may sound, but actually you would have to double those prices over the past month. So lumber prices have shot up in April, and they've just about doubled. So not quite, but almost doubled from where they were at the beginning of the month. So it's been a crazy run for lumber prices, certainly. And you would have to go back, really it's unprecedented. So as an economist, I adjust things for inflation. When we adjust for inflation, you have to go back to the early 1970s, 1973 to be exact, before you see lumber prices that are anywhere close to where we're at today. So this year, we'll probably end up the year around, US dollars per thousand board feet, about $1,100. And back in the early 1970s, we hit a peak of $960. So we're about 14% above that peak today.
So nearly half a century ago is what you say. Sue, how about in your career in this industry? Ever seen anything like this before?
No, we work in years of advancement for all of our sales, and we always have had some form of predictability as to where these prices are going to land within a few $100s or maybe even up to $1,000. Today we have no certainty as to what our lumber costs are going to be on builds that we're pre-selling but aren't going to even be getting to within the next few months. So it's causing a lot of stress between builders right now.
I can imagine. Chris, how about you in your career? Ever seen anything like this before?
No, it's crazy. Not only the prices, but just the shortages. I look outside my window here, and I don't see much wood, which isn't really a good thing when you're in a retail business like we're in. Not only do I see different prices every time I buy it, but when it comes in, it just flies off the shelves and then they're empty again. Usually I like to look out there and see not only wood on the shelves, but stacks of lumber to replace it. And I don't see any of that.
Well, okay, let me do a quick follow-up here, because usually when people say, oh yeah, the stuff's flying off the shelves, they mean sales are brisk, but they don't literally mean that the shelves are bare. What's on your shelves right now?
Not much, especially in the softwoods, because there is such a shortage. Pine's very tough to get. Cedar's very tough to get. It's tough because I get inundated with calls every day. Oh, do you have 2x4 cedar? Not only do I not have it, but number two, I don't know when it's coming in, and number three, because I don't know when it's coming in, what my price is going to be, I can't tell you what the price is going to be. So just all around, it's very, very tough going right now.
Sue, what is this doing to home builders in the province?
Well, I would say that a lot of us are deciding just how many new homes that we want to release right now. Typically, we would sell off phasing of homes. So that could be for us, maybe 50 units at a time. We're now limiting that to maybe 4, just to try to keep our pricing a little more secure. A lot of builders are also not pre-selling at all, and therefore they're just not selling as many homes each year, or they're waiting until the homes get to a certain point, maybe after framing is complete, before they put those houses up for sale, just so that they have better certainty as to what their pricing actually is.
Paul, let me get you back in here and ask, who's making all the money right now?
Well, it's a combination of the Crown, so the Canadian government, who's seen the timber stumpage prices rise dramatically. So that would be the provinces, British Columbia and Alberta in particular, to a lesser extent, Ontario and Quebec, and then also the lumber manufacturers. And then if you go into the U.S., it's definitely the lumber manufacturers. So if you look at a place like the U.S. South, where they have an abundance of fiber, the timber cost, which is the main component of the cost of producing lumber, they haven't gone up much at all.
Now, when you say fiber, you mean wood?
Yes. So the timber, that fiber is the tree. So you harvest the round tree, you run it through a sawmill, and you create rectangular lumber boards out of it.
Okay. And Paul, again, I guess a second obvious question, why is this happening at this particular moment in our history?
Yeah, you have to go back to late 2018, 2019, when we had really a pretty sharp downturn in lumber prices in the second half of 2018, lasted through 2019. And so production came off pretty dramatically at that point. So mills came into 2020 without having production down some. And then the pandemic hits. And what do people think when they see this pandemic? Well, they think that demand for their products across the board are going to plunge, and you only need to look to China or to Italy, and you could see just the major declines in industrial production and economic activity and the stay-at-home orders. So what did dealers do, the people who are buying the wood? Well, they drew down their inventories. They stopped buying wood, and they were just selling wood. What did mills do? They cut way back on production. So we saw in the province of British Columbia, for instance, that production was sliced in half. So mills were preparing and dealers were preparing for very, very weak consumption. And then what happened after the pandemic hit? Well, everyone was forced to stay home with these stay-at-home orders. So they were forced to work from home. And they couldn't spend their time or their money anywhere else. You couldn't go to sporting events, which I guess perhaps for some people in Toronto was actually okay. You couldn't go to
I'm not sure, but I think that was a shot. Actually, I think I am sure that was a shot.
Yeah, sorry about that. So no sporting events, no cultural events. You couldn't go to restaurants. You couldn't go on vacation. You had nowhere to spend your time or your money. And you were stuck at home. So you were looking around your home and you were seeing all the things that needed to be fixed. And oh, by the way, your kids were doing their schoolwork from home and you were doing your work from home. So if you wanted to add on, this was the time to do it because you needed that extra space. So in part for people looking for additions, alterations, improvements, this was really the time when they really wanted to do that. And then on top of that, interest rates plunged. They got very, very low. So it became affordable to do that. And then a final component would be on the new home construction side. People wanted to get out of the cities. They wanted to leave high density living and get into more lower density living situations. So the new home construction side just really surged. So we had a situation where the supply side was declining and the demand side was improving. You flash forward a couple months, and mills, once they realized that the demand was real and was sustainable, they tried to increase production. But then you ran into COVID quarantine restrictions on how they could increase that production. So you have one person who catches COVID at a mill, and then that person has to isolate. You have, everyone who came in contact with that person has to quarantine for 14 days. And, a sawmill isn't what it was 20 or 30 years ago. They're high-tech pieces of equipment, and they need highly skilled labor to run those mills. And if you have someone who's out of work for 14 days, you can't just hire somebody to come in and replace that person. So the mills just simply weren't able to keep up. Their production wasn't able to keep up with demand. And that came at a time after 2 months of inventory drawdown. So the inventory wasn't there. And so that really, in a nutshell, describes why prices got so high.
It sounds like a real perfect storm, to be sure. Sue, let me do a sort of a real life example with you on this right now. I presume your company is in the process of building homes in and around the London area right now. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Are there times when you're not sure whether you actually have enough wood left or can get access to it to complete the construction of a new home?
Yes, we have run into that. And certainly in particular, certain products like engineered floor systems are very challenging if you're able to get them at all right now. So we are having to sort of do a lot of on the fly changes to our homes. If we have to change a floor system partway through where we were expecting to be able to get that material and then now we can't, we're having to re-engineer houses even sometimes after they've started to be constructed, resubmit those plans to the city for review, and wait until that review can come back out of city to continue that construction of that home. So it's certainly adding delays to our timing, delays to homeowners being able to move into their homes, and a lot of frustration.
Well, you've anticipated my next question, which is if somebody was expecting, for example, to be able to take possession of their new home, let's say in July, what are they looking at now?
I would say most builders like us are anticipating on average at least 6 weeks of delays from this. And as much as I think a couple of our sites, just if you add all the delays from not just lumber, but all the other material shortages that we're getting, it can be a couple of months behind.
And how are your customers sort of rolling with those punches?
Well, we try to communicate as best as we can. And I think that's really the key to keeping that communication line open with your customers. We sort of fill them in as we experience delays on the fly so that they're not, giving up their rental unit that maybe they're living in right now to try to add some buffer times to getting out of where they're living so that they're not homeless or having to move in with family members. So far, they've been very understanding. I think there's enough news going on that people really realize what new home builders are going through. So we've been very pleased with our customers up till now.
Yeah, I mean, there was a moment, I guess, many months ago when a lot of people were sort of pointing at Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, and saying, really, home building is an essential service? You want to let them continue to do their thing during the course of this pandemic? And that was the argument he was using, which is, we don't want to have people homeless. They've bought their homes. They want to get into their homes. We got to get them finished as fast as possible. I presume that argument resonates with you very strongly.
Absolutely. So, I mean, everyone needs to live in a home. And we don't want to see people homeless or having to, especially during COVID, having to move in with other families to meet that need. And you can think just the trickle effect that occurs when the backlog of people moving into their homes sort of can build up so quickly. So there's houses that have in the resale market that have pre-sold, and those people have to be out. They're not waiting on a new home to be constructed, but that trickle effect can just add up, and then you can have multiple families that perhaps wouldn't have somewhere to be.
Gotcha. Okay, Chris, let me get you back in here. Have your customers' habits or tastes or desires changed as a result of the wood shortage?
I would say that the customer profile has changed a little bit. It not only has to do with the shortage, but even just with COVID in general. A lot of people have realized, they got a lot of time on their hands now since they're stuck at home. I would say that even though a lot of people say they're working 40 hours a week, I would say that based on who we're seeing in here, that's probably not the case. So there's a lot of new woodworkers, which is actually exciting for us because a lot more people are purchasing wood, which is a good harbinger for the future, as long as prices kind of bottom out a little bit. But yeah, people are having to adapt, to what they can get their hands on. So, if we're short on pine, tongue and groove, maybe they pay 3 times the price to get cedar. And it's not because they want to do it, but because they want to be able to move into their house. Like you were just talking about, nobody wants to sit in an unfinished house. So people are having to change kind of what their original plan was and roll with the punches and roll with what materials available.
Do you see customers sort of kicking the can down the road and deciding that they're not going to purchase that new home, or they're not going to do that renovation or build that deck or a gazebo in the backyard because they want to wait for lumber prices to come down?
I've heard it a little bit. Kind of one thing we hear is like we get a lot of calls. And to Paul's point earlier, when you're asking who's making all the money, I can say it's not us necessarily. You know what I mean? Like I'm not sitting in here every day diving into money like Scrooge McDuck. You know what I mean? Doing backstrokes into $20 bills or lighting cigars with $100 bills. That's not what's going on here. People will only pay so much. So we on the retail end are having to eat into margins, because I think when you're working with customers every day, you know what people will pay and what they can kind of stomach. And I think we're starting to get to the point where we're getting very close to, that teetering point where basically people will just start saying no. And I think, unfortunately, it's getting closer and closer to that point.
Well, Sue, let me get you to follow up on that point then. Has this current pandemic changed, I guess, the types of renovations or the types of houses that Ontarians are now looking for?
Certainly our clients have changed. We're seeing more people coming from the GTA that are moving down Highway 401 to London. We have never seen as many people from Toronto that are looking to get out of the city, that know that they can work from home, and are willing to move a few hours away in order to do so. Our floor plans, I would say, are also changing. Clients are looking for definitely more home offices. They're moving away from the open floor plans that we have been building over the last many years, where homes are just one big open space. They are looking to have those more private spaces included in their home plans. And generational suites are really taking off. So now, because of pricing being what it is, in order for some customers to be able to make that jump to a new home, they're having to incorporate generational suites and maybe bring in family members to help pay for it. So that's been a big trend that we're seeing here.
Just want to make sure I understand that. A generational suite, as in not only room for the parents, not only rooms for the kids, but maybe for grandparents as well in the same home?
Correct, yes. So we're incorporating sort of separate areas that may have their own sort of kitchen area, living spaces, and bedrooms as part of the overall house plan.
Huh, okay. It's interesting. We're hearing lots of anecdotal evidence about people leaving Toronto and moving, anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 hours outside Toronto, on the theory that if you don't have to go into the office every day, or maybe the future means going into the office once a week or once every other week, there's no reason to put up with the kind of house prices in Toronto that people have to put up with. So you are definitely seeing actual hard evidence of that phenomenon. Is that right?
Absolutely. I would say in the last 8 months, 80% of our purchasers are from the GTA.
And they're moving into the London area.
Yes.
Paul, let me get you back in here. The wood that Canadians use, people in Ontario use to build their homes or their decks or whatever, where does that wood usually come from?
So it would come from really one of two main producing areas, either Western Canada or Eastern Canada. So BC is the single largest producing region, followed by Quebec, and then Alberta and Toronto after that. And you do have some production in the Maritimes as well, so in the Atlantic provinces also. But BC has traditionally been the largest producing region, and this is another factor that isn't talked about a lot from the perspective of lumber prices. But if we go back to the previous peak in lumber demand, we had 15 billion board feet of lumber being produced in British Columbia. Today, it's about 8 to 9 billion board feet. So there was a mountain pine beetle that devastated the lodgepole pine resource there. And so just to put it into some perspective, it's SPF lumber is spruce, pine, and fir. And so there's about 1.2 billion cubic meters of spruce, pine, and fir in the British Columbia forests. So the mountain pine beetle killed over 700 million cubic meters of that 1.2 billion cubic meters. And lodgepole pine was the strongest of the three species too. So it was it was probably the preferred species to use in construction. So that wood's just simply not available. So their production levels have come off sharply, but still they're the largest producing region.
And Paul, given transportation costs, do we infer that wood that comes from Ontario for an Ontario market would be, under normal circumstances, less expensive than wood that had to be shipped in from British Columbia or Quebec?
Yes, absolutely.
And is that the case right now?
Yes. Well, so the delivered wood is actually, once the wood is delivered there, that's pretty much all the same price. So your wood is determined by the marginal cost producer. So if your wood, it's cheaper for the mill going from Ontario into the Toronto area to ship it into the Toronto area, but the mill really makes that differential in transportation.
Now, I noticed when you gave that list of places where we get our wood from, BC came on the list, Quebec came on the list before Ontario. Why? Yes. I mean, we got a lot of trees in Ontario. Why is Ontario not higher up that list?
Well, you have a lot of trees, but just not as many as some of these other provinces. So they simply have a larger resource. So one of the things about the lumber industry is everyone's very concerned about harvesting at a sustainable level. So in Canada, you have something which is called an annual allowable cut, or an AAC. So the provincial governments spend a lot of time and put a lot of resources into determining just how many trees you could harvest sustainably. And so if your forest resource is smaller, as it is in Ontario, you simply can't harvest as many trees. So the industry is naturally smaller.
Well, can the government of Ontario not make a decision that, okay, because of the times and the extraordinary circumstances we now find ourselves in, we're going to let you take down more trees?
Yeah, they wouldn't do that because this is, I think there's environmental concerns here. And so there's a couple of things. One, the industry wouldn't do that because they are actually concerned about the long run sustainability of their ability to produce the product. And so they know if they harvest at an unsustainable level today, that means they're going to have less wood to be able to harvest in 15 or 20 years from now. So they're not really interested in doing that from a long-term perspective. And, the governments are concerned about the environment and they don't want to harvest at too high of a level.
Chris, can I get you to come in on that? Would you urge the government of Ontario to allow more harvesting right now, given the extraordinary circumstances in which we find ourselves?
Obviously, what Paul's saying about the environmental concerns, they are important. And we do get calls and questions from clients all the time about the sustainability of the lumber that we're selling. So it is a concern. But obviously, the fact that the demand is so high and the supply is so low is another major issue. So if there was a way that, we could kind of get the best of both worlds, obviously I would be on board with that. Because I think at the end of the day, it is better for the consumer if there's more product in the marketplace. And I'm sure everyone on the panel would agree with that line there.
Sue, can I get you on that as well?
Certainly, we would love to have more supply right now. However, I think quality is very important. We wouldn't want to risk any kind of quality to the materials that we're using for people's new homes. We have started seeing some lumber that's been coming in from other countries that we've been given warnings on not to use here in Ontario. So we're hopeful that we can just continue to use Canadian lumber. and keep those quality levels at the highest that they are.
Okay, Sue, you can't say
Can I
something
add?
like that to. Oh yeah, go ahead. Come on in.
So, yeah, so there are three components that you need to produce lumber, right? So one is the timber, and timber is really key. A second component is you need the mill to process that lumber, and a third component is you need the labor to turn that timber into lumber. So it's not just a matter of increasing the supply of fiber. You have limitations on the machinery on the machinery side, the actual mills that are in the ground. And then you have labor force constraints as well, which is you need a skilled worker to be able to produce that wood. So even if the government did a short-term look for the next year, we're going to increase the supply, the mills couldn't actually ramp up production really any more than they have today.
Because we have a shortage of labor in this area as well.
Well, labor and also capacity. So if you have a mill that's operational, you're producing as much lumber out of that mill as your labor force will allow you to today. So, and as your fiber supply will allow you to. So the mills are not holding back any lumber in order to keep prices up. They're producing as much as they possibly can because they want to take advantage of these high prices.
And Sue, I thought I heard you say there are some countries from which wood is coming right now that you're sort of being nudge, nudge, wink, wink, urged not to purchase. Can you fill in those blanks a bit?
Well, we have seen through our home builder associations information coming out to the builders as a sort of warning that there has been other lumber that has been coming into Ontario that has been offered for sale. That is not approved lumber through the Ontario government or Canadian government. So we know it's out there, and due to the lack of supply, I'm sure that some people will be trying to bring their lumber through for people and purchasers to be able to access. We are just trying to make sure that we are buying the best lumber that we can get, Canadian lumber, and can ensure that it's the highest quality that we can offer to our purchasers.
What countries are you being urged not to purchase from? And is it a question of quality or is it trade agreements and that kind of thing?
We've seen lumber coming out of Brazil. That's the main one that we are seeing that some people are purchasing. Our own suppliers do not bring that in and do not sell it, but it's been sort of a warning that to builders and home builder associations for builders to keep an eye out. So they make sure that the lumber that they are receiving on sites is not from some of these countries.
And Paul, is that a quality issue or is that a trade thing?
Yeah. So if you think about how a tree grows, each year a tree puts on a ring and grows a little bit wider. So if your tree needs to be a certain dimension before you can run it through the mill, and it grows extremely fast, then naturally those rings are going to be widely spaced, right? So if you could grow a tree in 20 years, say you were going to grow a tree to be 37 centimeters in diameter, and that's what you're going to run through your mills, and you can do that in 25 years, you're going to have a much wider rings than, say, a tree that takes you 120 years to grow. And that tree that takes you 120 years to grow is going to be much stronger structurally. And that's exactly what's happening. Is in Brazil, you have very, very fast growing plantation southern pine that where the rings are far apart. So structurally, they don't have the strength, as they're not nearly as strong as an SPF, so a spruce, pine, or fir tree that grows in Ontario or any of the other provinces where it takes 80 to 120 years to actually grow that tree. So yes, it is simply a quality issue. I shouldn't say a quality issue; it's a strength issue.
Gotcha. Chris, I wonder how, are there days you sit behind that desk of yours and you say to yourself, I can't believe how crazy this is. We've been encouraging people to use made in Ontario wood products to do so much of their building for such a long period of time. We're now finally at a point where people want to do it, love to do it, and yet we've got a terrible shortage going on and prices going through the roof. You feel a bit snake bit right now?
It's terrible, right? And used to sit here at this desk and I'd have 5 sales guys a day rolling in to me to try to sell me lumber. And, it's kind of weird to have the shoe on the other foot in the sense that now I'm hunting them down trying to buy stuff. So it just doesn't feel right. When the owner of a business is out there trying to find the product, when I used to be able to sit here and they would come to me, it's a little different in that sense. And, it's terrible because I get, like I said earlier, dozens of calls a day. When's it coming in? When am I going to see this? I need to build this. Have you got your material yet? Have you got your material yet? I have about 10 people who email me every Tuesday saying, hey, have you got your cedar in yet for the year? And every Tuesday, nope, not yet. Maybe next week. Check back again next week, same bad time, same bad channel. Hopefully I'll give you a yes at some point, but it's very frustrating, right? You know what I mean? We have great customers, and the last thing you want as a business owner is your customers to go to the guy down the street, because you never know if they're going to come back, right?
I am hearing stories, Paul, that there are people, for example, who would actually, in British Columbia forests, these are individual citizens, take down trees on their own. I guess they're stealing them, right? They take them down on their own and they schlep them back to their own camps or their own properties and do what they will with them. Is this a widespread thing right now?
I don't think it's widespread, but if you go back to the middle part of last decade, a cubic meter of mountain pine beetle killed lodgepole pine was selling for 25 cents. Today, if you're getting, granted, it's killed versus not killed, but because there's no more killed timber left, but or not much of it left. So the green timber is selling for $35 plus per cubic meter. So yes, there's a huge incentive to go out there and harvest these logs and sell them. But obviously the province of Quebec is doing their best to prevent that from. Of British Columbia is doing their best to prevent that from happening.
I think maybe a half a dozen times over the last couple of decades, we've ended up having to cover the story of a softwood lumber dispute between the government of the United States and the government of Canada. And I think those kinds of trade disputes over wood only go back about as far as your Revolutionary War in the 1770s. Do you think that with the new Biden administration in place and a government in Canada at the moment, which seems to be ideologically more simpatico with them, that there's any possibility of getting some kind of more permanent solution to that problem now?
I don't think there is, actually. So I don't think that the actual presidential administration is all that important as to to whether or not we have an agreement. Definitely the dispute goes back for centuries, but certainly the current round of disputes started in the early 1980s, and we all know we've seen a lot of different governments and a lot of different philosophies in the United States since then. So, and throughout all of it, there's been the trade dispute has been really front and center for a number of different states. So one interesting thing, actually, if you think about it, is the current dispute was actually initiated under the Obama administration and finally implemented under the Trump administration. So this actually spans 2 administrations. So one of the reasons why is, if you think about how what sort of pressures can you bring to bear on the U.S. government? And if you're looking at the way our Senate is created, each state has 2 senators. And so for some states, you may have a variety of issues that are of prime importance to those senators. But for other states, and agricultural states in particular, there's really only a few issues that are of utmost importance to those people. So if you look across states like Oregon, Washington, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, so in some of these states you have timber in the timber industry is very important to those states. And so I'm not going to say they're one issue. There's just one issue, but it's one issue that's of prime and paramount importance to these senators. So they will push hard for that. And if you can get together a coalition of senators from 7 or 8 different states, I mean, you're talking 14 to 16 senators that can really swing something. So you do end up with a lot of pressure being put on all administrations from these more rural senatorial districts.
Gotcha. Paul, Sue, Chris, great of you to join us on TVO tonight. Keep the faith. See you down the road sometime, I hope.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Steve.
How many times have you caught yourself over the past year saying, my goodness, I miss going to the movies? I think if you're like most folks, the answer is a lot. Cinemas all over Ontario have been shuttered during this pandemic at great cost to the employees, theatre owners, and of course, patrons who love seeing movies the way they're meant to be seen, on the big screen. Ellis Jacob is the president and CEO of Cineplex, which operates 165 cinemas with more than 1,600 screens across Canada, and he joins us now from Midtown in the provincial capital with more. Mr. Jacobs, good to meet you. How are you doing?
Great to meet you too. Well, thank you.
You are in the business of showing movies, and of course, tell us what this past year has been like for you when you can't show any movies.
It has really been tough because everybody I speak with really misses that movie-going experience. And, it's great you can watch movies at home, but it doesn't compare to that experience socially and with all of the extras that you get when you visit a theater. And I can't wait to get back.
You've got more than 13,000 employees across the country, everyone from top executives to people who put the popcorn in the boxes. How many of those 13,000 have you had to lay off, do you think?
We've laid off a number of the frontline staff because of what we're going through, but our full-time staff, we have basically kept as much as possible. We took salary reductions in 2020, including all of the executives right the way through. And the government with the CEWS program has helped us retain a number of the employees in our locations across the country. So we thank them for that.
Right,
Employee wage
subsidy. Yeah.
Right.
Now, yours is a company that normally does, I think, about $1.5 billion in business every year. How much revenue were you able to realize this past year?
In 2020, we took a huge nosedive. Of course, the first quarter was strong, and then it declined dramatically for the rest of the year. And we ended up, I think, in the $300 to $400 million range. I don't have the number right in front of me.
That's a big dip.
Yes, it was a significant dip for the quarter and for the year.
Now, if the movie theaters are closed, how are you making any money at all?
We have a number of assets that still do generate money. We've got the Cineplex digital media, where we basically market and put screens in banks and stores and all across Canada and some US locations, and that's continued to do not great business, but it's done well for us as we've gone through the pandemic. Then we've got the Cineplex store, where you can actually watch a movie through purchasing the movie or renting the movie, and we even deliver food with Uber Eats and Skip the Dishes, so you can replicate the cinema experience in your home. And we've tried to communicate with our guests through the Scene Loyalty program as we move forward.
I know that there have been many people in the cultural industries who have had meetings with either the Minister, Lisa MacLeod, or with the Premier, Doug Ford himself. And I'm wondering whether you have had, over the past year, direct talks, either in person or on Zoom, with the Premier of Ontario to try to convince him to allow your theaters to remain open under, obviously, extra special circumstances.
Yes, I have spoken with the Premier on a number of occasions, and also spoken to Minister MacLeod, and worked very hard to, and Minister MacLeod actually came to a movie with our team, and she really had a great experience, and said we were the gold standard of safety protocols within the theaters. And the challenge is really with the medical groups and how they treat us. Now, as I've said publicly, we have never had a case of COVID in our theaters, and globally there has not been a case of COVID which has started from a movie theater. So we basically feel we are doing all we can to keep our employees and our guests very safe as we move forward.
If that's the case, why won't they let you open?
That's a good question, and we keep bringing that up as to, that we have a safe environment. but everybody's concerned about indoor social gatherings. But with the proper physical distancing, I think everybody is looking in the same direction. There's not a lot of discussion and communication, so it's a very high-ceilinged environment, and it's in a good position.
Well, I hate to be a cliche here, but because I suspect hundreds of people, if not thousands, have shared their movie-going experiences with you over the past year. But the last time I was in one of your theaters was last September. I went to an IMAX theater up at number 7, Highway 7, just north of Toronto, 300-seat theater. There were 4 people. I was one of 4 people in that cinema. We had our masks on. Obviously, we were sitting physically distanced with that small number of people there. And except for the fact that the theater was empty, it was a great experience. It was wonderful to be able to see a movie, I think it was Tenet, on the big screen. Again, when I came into the theater, they checked my temperature. There were plexiglass behind which popcorn could be sold. It seemed pretty safe to me. So again, what's the problem that the government of Ontario seems to think exists here that it won't let you open up?
We keep having those discussions, and it's individuals like yourself that help us if we communicate back to the government and the authorities and the medical groups to see what we are doing and how safe it is to have that great experience within a cinema environment. And the province of Quebec, as you are aware, when the March break for the students were on, they actually allowed us to open, and the kids came to the theaters and had a great experience while they were on the break. And that has continued, and in Quebec, we've got all but a couple of theaters open, and they are all opening by next week.
Has the province given you any indication? I mean, perhaps right in the middle of this third wave, they don't want to do it, but how soon after the third wave is over, you might be able to reopen?
We are hoping that comes quickly with the vaccines rolling out much faster, and hope the numbers continue to drop. And we are looking forward to reopening, once we get past May 20th and, we're able to open. Yes, we understand we will have seating capacity limitations, but we need to move that and ramp that up pretty quickly.
Now, some of your buildings are older. Are there any concerns among provincial officials that you haven't got, let's say, adequate ventilation in your cinemas?
We keep working on that, and we've actually now working on doubling the airflow through our theaters. So external air will be circulated faster through the theaters than they were in the past to complete that whole cycle, because it would be with the high ceilings, it would be much easier as that ventilation process is continuing to be moved forward.
I wonder if you ever made the argument to the province, Mr. Jacob, that, look, Toronto and Peel are in some difficulty. We know the numbers there are very high, but there are huge swaths of this province where there are very small case numbers, if any at all. Have you made the argument that can we open up in some places, maybe not Toronto or Peel, but elsewhere?
Yes, we've had that discussion and debate, but then they categorize each of the areas in different color zones. And Ontario has some of the toughest regulations. So, for example, if you're in an orange zone, you can only have 50 people in a building. So you can imagine when you went to the Colossus in Vaughan and you said there were 4 people, the chances are, because of the restrictions, the number of individuals in a building are restricted, and at 50 people, it doesn't make sense in a building that size. Whereas other provinces allow us to have, in some cases, 100 or 200 people with physical distancing in the auditoriums.
Okay, that's interesting. So let's understand that. How many tickets per theater would you have to be allowed to sell to get to the point where it actually makes financial sense for you to open up?
Look, as a starting point, I'd love to be able to at least have a minimum of 50 people in each auditorium, and then going up as we move forward, to 100 to 200 like we have in Quebec. And I understand that we need to physically distance, and we are comfortable, starting on that direction. But to say you can only have 50 people in a building that has 3,000 seats is impossible to get a financial return.
Right. Now, you made an announcement just the other day where your first quarter loss was 90 million bucks. How many more quarters of sustained losses, you know, can you, it's a big company, so I'm sure it can handle it, but at what point does it get uncomfortable?
Well, we've been very focused on having a strong financial position, and we are here for the long term. And we've also, in this past quarter, we did a sale leaseback of our head office building for $57 million. We raised $250 million in high yield notes to basically solidify us and take us through the pandemic and give us a good 12 months of breathing room if everything were to stay as bad as it is, and looking forward. But we are pretty excited to get back into business. Our employees are ready to go, and I think our guests are even more looking forward to the experience in the cinema.
So the plan is, as soon as you guys get the green light, bring those 13,000 people back and go, go, go?
That's it. We want to go as quickly as we can, and we are ready to go once we get the green light to move forward by the different provincial authorities.
And God forbid, but if there's a fourth wave, have you got contingency plans for that?
Well, as I said, we are very, financially strong for another good year to get us through, and we continue to look at, our financial position, the costs that we have within our business facilities, and all of the requirements as we move forward.
I should ask the other obvious question, which I'm sure people want me to ask, and that is, when the theaters do get opened again, are you going to have to raise the prices of tickets and all the confections in order to kind of make up for the losses of the past year?
We are going to be looking at all of the alternatives we have, but it's bringing our guests safely back that's the most important for us.
Okay, that was not a no. So it's on the table.
No, but it's not going to be a situation where you're going to see massive price increases for our guests. That's not something that we are looking to do. We want them to come back, have a great experience, and that to me is the most important. And through the pandemic, we've been very reasonable with pricing and what we have done for everything that we offer our guests.
Okay, this is not a business program, as you know, but I mean, the business of how you do what you do is of interest to our viewers and listeners. So I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you about the takeover that was in the process of taking place until this pandemic hit. I am curious about the $2.8 billion takeover by the UK company Cineworld, which they subsequently called off, and now I know it's in the midst of legal action. Where does that sit as we speak right now?
We are continuing with the legal action, and we have our hearing set for September of this year. And we've done depositions, they've done depositions, and we are going through the regular legal process. And it's made it a little more difficult because of the pandemic, but so far we are focused on the September date.
You have a gift for understatement. It's probably been more than a little difficult as a result of the pandemic.
That is correct.
That is correct. Okay. Is it your hope at the end of the day that in fact the sale will go through, they will purchase Cineplex, and shareholders can realize whatever benefits come from that?
Our focus is to basically make sure that our shareholders get the fair treatment that they deserve under the circumstances, and we move forward, and that Cineworld make sure that they can repay us for the lost funds that we suffered as a result of them reneging on the transaction.
Okay, let's move on. I want to play a clip now from a filmmaker that we had on this program a couple of months ago. Her name's April Mullen, and she had this to say about the state of movie theaters and streaming services, because, of course, as you pointed out at the top, that's where all the movie watching is happening these days. Let's play that clip, and then we'll come back and chat. If you would, please, Tony.
I do believe that now that audience have had over a year of getting content when they want it on the platforms they want it, we have to move with them. And even though, films are created for the big screen, and I am a huge lover of the big screen, and there's something incredible to watch, the feeling of watching in a community. That's what we make films for. But you also do, as the filmmakers and producers, have to give your content to the consumers and where they want it at the time they want it, because now it's just kind of very immediate. And I don't think there's any going backwards, because they've had a year of this kind of spoiled / they can watch whatever they want whenever they want in their living room.
How much do you worry about audiences having established new habits over the past year, and they may not come back to the cinemas in the numbers they once did?
We've been in this business for over 100 years. And, we've been faced with many situations, with originally with television, then with, the VCRs, DVDs, now we have streaming. And the bottom line is it's not the same experience as being able to have that social gathering and seeing a movie on a big screen with a big sound. And, you look at a movie like Tenet, can you imagine watching it even on a 50-inch TV screen, or compared to going to the movie theater? It's not the same. And I remember, many, many years ago, I'd ask my kids, what are you doing this evening? Now they're a lot older, but they would say nothing. Their definition of nothing was staying home and watching a movie. And to them, if they were going out to the movie, they would say, we are going out for an experience and a fun time at the theater.
No, there's no question. Going to a movie is an event. Staying home is an entirely different situation. But, and I appreciate the 100-year history you have, but people really have established new habits. And there are even more and newer streaming services coming online in the near future. I presume you worry about that, as confident as you are about your ability to come back.
Well, we worry, but what we are seeing, and we've seen that with all of the big studios, is they still value that theatrical window for the movie release. And as I've said repeatedly, we are the engine that drives the train. The knowledge about a film is driven by that theater experience. And to me, that's really important. And that's why some of the streamers are very keen to have their movies play in movie theaters.
Did you watch the Academy Awards this year?
Yes, I watched them, and it was difficult.
A bit of a different experience, even for you, in as much as none of the movies played in your cinemas?
Well, a lot of it had to do with the fact that we were closed, but it's a situation where we feel that the theatrical experience is very important, and that will come back as part of the overall process.
How important in the reopening and getting people to go back into the cinemas, how important, in your view, will the so-called, the action, big blockbuster superhero movies, how important is that going to be?
They are very important to our guests coming back, and I think those movies are very hard to experience in a small screen at home. And we see that all the time. And even when you look at movies like Demon Slayer, that opened in Japan and became the largest grossing movie ever, and this is post-pandemic, and comparing it to pre-pandemic movies. That movie, even in North America, has done extremely well. Our guests are hungry. They want that experience. And, you look at what's going on in the marketplace, and it's all about getting and having the ability to have that experience. And the, comparative thing I say is, you have food in your refrigerator, do you stop going out to eat? I know you said about cooking up your meals, but, we want to be social. We want to get out and be together.
Is there still the opportunity for kind of the smaller Canadian film that is not going to be a blockbuster, but has something to say? Will there still be a place for that film in Cineplex's future?
I'm a very strong proponent of Canadian films. I, love them, and I think the more we have from a Canadian film perspective would be great. But again, we have to make sure those films are marketed properly and also have a storyline that our guests want to come out and watch.
For sure. Mr. Jacob, just finally, if you had to put $20 down and make a bet and say, I bet you my theaters will be open by such and such a date, what is that date?
If you're looking at the whole circuit from coast to coast, I think you're looking towards the end of June. If you're looking at specific marketplaces, I would say it would be, end of May, early June. Because today we have, we'll have 30 theaters open across the country, and it all depends on the provincial positioning as we move forward.
And how about here in the province of Ontario? When are we going to see them all open again?
If the shots keep coming in the way we are hearing from a vaccine perspective, I think, once we get past that May 20th date, I think there will be reopenings, and then they will accelerate as we get into June. And I'm quite optimistic, and I'm encouraged by, what I see around the world, and looking forward to it for us here in Ontario and Canada.
So keep the jabs coming.
That is the most important. I even offered our theaters for the jabs.
Did they say yes or what?
No, we had discussions, and they basically didn't take us up on it. We did in some provinces use the theaters for COVID testing, but not the actual vaccines themselves. But in smaller markets, we thought it would be a great idea that the guests would be familiar with the local theaters, and they would be able to come out and get their vaccine. And we could basically, do something for them while they did that. And I think that would have been exciting.
Well, put me on the list of those who can't wait to get back into a real movie theater to see a real movie. And we're grateful you spared some time for us on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your time, and looking forward to seeing you at a movie soon.
And that is the agenda for Monday, May the 10th, 2021. In this booming housing market, is it better to rent or to buy? We'll consider that tomorrow. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.